Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. My name is Lauren Leggett. I am visiting with you guys today from Purvis, Mississippi at the Country Schoolhouse and Education Resource Center. And our focus and mission here is to implement agriculture education in as many subjects and topics as possible. So let me tell you a little bit about who I am. My name, again, like I said, is Lauren Leggett. I graduated from Mississippi State University in 2013 from the Department of Education, and I have loved teaching ever since. I did get to have a really unique experience during my very first year of teaching. I moved out to a rural town in Montana named Jackson, Montana, and taught at a modern day one-room schoolhouse. We only had 2 classrooms in the whole school with only 10 students for our entire student population. But of those 10 kids, 8 of those students lived on local ranches, 1,000-acre ranches and more. And during the time that I worked with these students, I started to develop an interest in integrating agriculture education into the classroom because so often I had students who would understand the concepts that I was presenting in either our science or math classes at different times, and they would understand before I could even get the concept fully taught because they had seen an example of something similar to that on their ranches. And over the 2-year time that I spent at this school, the more I talked to the students, the more I learned and the more I developed a passion for ag education. So fast forward a few years, my husband and I and our son moved back from Montana to Mississippi for my husband to take a teaching position at the Math and Science School. From there, we moved down to my husband's family farm, 40-acre grass-fed beef farm here in Purvis. And when we moved here, we started to figure out ways to implement that agriculture education with our own son and really wanted to take that opportunity and grow it for our community and share that experience with as many kids in our community as possible. So the idea of the Country Schoolhouse was born from a love of agriculture education. Between my husband and I, we decided we wanted to pull in some of the elements from that rural school in Montana and what we had learned in that experience, plus what we were newly learning on the farm after we moved back and took over his family farm. As I began to implement some of these ideas with our own son on the farm, I realized that having grown up in a city, in a suburb with sidewalks, that I knew nothing about farming. When you start looking online, there are thousands of resources that you can choose from, and trying to narrow down what was the correct thing to use, the right way to do it, and how to implement it best was very overwhelming to me. I realized that if it was overwhelming to me as an adult, it would be 10 times more overwhelming to a child that may be interested in, say, growing a garden in their backyard or raising an animal for an FFA project. So the Country Schoolhouse developed year after year as we saw the need arising in our students of questions that they asked. And over time, we developed a system of teaching that implemented agriculture characteristics and aspects into almost every lesson plan that we do and every class that we offer at the schoolhouse. Even classes that are not ag-based, such as a drama class or an art class, are sometimes sitting outside at our picnic tables doing their art projects next to the chicken coop and the pig pens and our cows in the pasture. We work very hard to try and normalize the idea of implementing agriculture in all aspects of our life. One of the things that was most important to me as an educator was to continue learning and being a lifelong learner. Through that, I started taking CEU courses through Farm Bureau and other local organizations that taught a lot of agriculture education implementation. Mississippi State University was a great resource for that, and in 2020 I took a course and was able to become a certified agriculture ambassador for our area, that I am able to go into classrooms and work with students and adults alike to teach them a little bit more about how to work these concepts into their daily life. In 2020, I had the honor of receiving the award for the Agriculture Classroom Teacher of the Year through the Farm Bureau organization, and through that organization I was able to go to the National Agriculture in the Classroom Conference and learn lessons and gather resources that I was able to bring back and use at the Country Schoolhouse, and we're still implementing some of these lessons today. Agriculture education is something that everyone should know about, not just students or not just adults. It should span the spectrum of ages because agriculture plays a role in everyone's life all throughout the day. If you got up and ate breakfast this morning, you ate food that was grown on a farm. If you are wearing clothes, you are wearing fibers that were grown on a farm. If you live in a home that has any timber in it, you live in a building, a shelter that has a product that was grown on a farm. So knowing where your food, fiber, and shelter comes from is an important part of who we are as human beings. A lot of your students may say they have no interest in agriculture. They may say, I don't plan to grow up and be a farmer. And I hear this all the time with students. But I ask them those questions. Did you eat breakfast this morning? Are you wearing clothes? Did you sleep in a house last night? And of course, the answer to all of these is yes. My job as an educator is to make the connection of why that answer is yes, and the students to have an awareness of agriculture education and why it is so important in their lives. Now, in a day of technology where everybody has a phone or a video game, talking about farming or agriculture may not seem the most interesting thing to your students. So you need some kind of a demonstration, something that is going to grab their attention and really pull them in for what you're about to talk to them about. One of my favorite lessons to show this idea, demonstrate for students just how important agriculture really is for everyone, takes nothing but a simple apple, a cutting board, and a knife. This particular lesson is called A Slice of Life. In this lesson, we pretend that this apple here is the globe, or our Earth. And bear with me, because as our globe is also not a perfect sphere, nor is this apple. So we're gonna go ahead, put my apple down. We're gonna start with slicing it just in half. And if you have younger students who are still learning fractions, this is a great time to ask them as you cut it in half, I had a whole, now I have 2 parts, how many do I have? And let students answer for you. So we have halves. Then we're gonna go ahead and cut it in fourths, so give it one more slice down the middle. Okay. Now, unfortunately, I'm not gonna need 3 of these 4 parts of this apple that I just cut up, because these 3 parts represent the salt water that covers 75% of our Earth, or 3/4 of our globe. So we're down to 1/4. Now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna cut this 1/4 in half. Talk to your students, ask them, do they know the fraction now? If we had fourths, we cut it each fourth in half. How many would we have now? 8ths, okay. But unfortunately, I'm gonna have to throw one of these 8ths away, because this 8th represents land that we cannot grow any crops on. Land that is swamps, deserts, mountain ranges, and the Arctic. We can't use that. So now we're down to 1/8 of the globe, but that's not usable land either. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna cut this 8th into 4 more pieces. While I'm cutting, think about what fraction that's gonna be. Don't worry about trying to get all your pieces exactly even, because it's almost impossible. Just get 4 nice slices. Okay, now we have the fraction of 30 seconds. We're gonna also get rid of 3 of these 30 seconds pieces. We're gonna toss those over here, because that also is unusable land. That's land that we have either developed as humans. It is either too poor of soil for production, too rocky, too wet, or too dry. So all we're left with is this one last little piece here. And as big as this may look, I'm gonna take even more out of it, because the only part of the Earth's crust that we can actually grow food in is topsoil. Topsoil normally goes down about 2 feet in depth below the surface. In some places, such as the Mississippi Delta, topsoil goes down as far as 40 feet. But majority of places around the world are gonna have less than 2 feet of topsoil all the way around. So all we're left with that can actually grow food, usable soil, is 1/32 of the entire globe. It's not very much. And we have a population on our planet that is steadily growing at an exponential rate every year. Where's the food gonna come from? Ask your students this, and ask them ideas of ways that we grow food and manage it for the population of our entire world. All right, so let's talk about an easy way that we can implement some ag education into your everyday lessons. So this particular lesson that is going to be based around apples is more for our lower age range, pre-K up to about 1st grade, but any good teacher can always remediate and enrich, so you might see a few aspects of this lesson that you could take to a higher level should you teach an older grade. So, apples are fairly cheap, and I know as teachers we're always trying to stay on a budget. You can pick up 2 to 3 apples at your local grocery store, and that will feed your entire class for this particular lesson. And let me show you how. So I've got an apple here that I went ahead and started cutting up in just regular slices, like for a snack plate. But once you get all of your wedge pieces, like so, cut up. Cut them into small pieces like this. And you, with one apple, can feed almost 20 different students for this activity. So what we're gonna do is a taste test comparison. So we are going to let students taste the different types of apples. Now, to start out with, we'll take the apple. We'll ask students to look at it. We'll get some descriptive words going on the apple. What shape is it? What color is it? How does it feel in our hands? Is it heavy? Is it light? Is it big? Is it small? Use some of these adjectives and descriptive words to get the brain juices flowing a little bit there. Get students working towards the idea, larger concept that we're thinking of here. So we're gonna look at one apple, we're gonna describe it, then we're gonna take a completely different apple and we're gonna talk about the differences we see in that. Do a little compare and contrast here. You can even do a Venn diagram on your board with these. But let students look at them, let them feel them, hold them, experience the color, the feel, the weight in their hands, and then slice them into the little pieces. You can just put them on a napkin, put them on a paper plate, but pass them around and let everyone in the classroom try apple number 1. Don't tell them the name of the apple yet, just tell them number 1. Try apple number 1. Next, cut up your second apple. Let everybody test apple number 2. Then you ask by a show of hands how many students preferred the red apple over the green apple. You take a count, write this on your board, or if you have a little bit older student, you can have them writing the data onto a sheet that they're gonna then turn into a graph later. But using just 2 simple apples, some little bite size, we're going to do a comparison of taste, and we're going to count how many students in the classrooms preferred this apple over the other, and talk about the differences, what students liked about them, what they didn't like about them. Another great math opportunity that you can use with your apples is how many quadrants are there in an apple, how many fractions can you make out of an apple, and how many bits of pieces can you get out of an apple. You can do estimation before starting. Can we get 15 pieces out of this apple? Can we get 20 pieces out of this apple? Let students guess and then do the cutting in front of them. When you engage students in what's about to happen right in front of them, it piques their interest, keeps their interest a little more glued to what's happening right here in front of them. So we have our math lesson. That's one option. Doing our graphing and our taste test comparison. Let's do a little bit of literature integration with agriculture education. Excuse me, guys. So, Johnny Appleseed, somebody that almost every kid has heard of, or nowadays, sometimes maybe not. But ask the students by show of hands, do they think that Johnny Appleseed was a real person or not? There are tons of cartoons out there about this gentleman, and he actually was a real person. And this short little book tells the story of Johnny Appleseed, who he really was, and how he did spread apple seeds all over the northeastern part of our country at the turn of the century prior to becoming a country. So this is a really great book, great illustrations, and it's going to talk about a real person for us. Now, if you want to integrate a little bit of geography into your apple lesson, another great book is called How to Make an Apple Pie and See the World. And in this book, the girl here decides she's going to cook an apple pie, but all the stores are closed. So she has to take a trip around the world and collect all the ingredients for her apple pie in places where they are grown. And through this experience, she visits every continent on the globe. So if you're in the study process of learning about your 7 continents or doing some mapping skills, this is a great way to bring the apples in and actually make the apple pie in your classroom. Now, I know not every classroom is able to have a toaster oven in your classroom, but usually cafeteria workers are always helpful and willing to bake something like this should you bring it down to them. But if you include the tasting aspect with the students, you pique their interest again. What are these apples going to taste like when they're baked? Another great compare and contrast opportunity is how do they taste cooked versus raw? Do they have a different texture? Do they have a different feel, a different smell? Do they taste different than they did raw? So that's a great resource for that one. If you're looking for an informational text, a nonfiction item, another great book is From Seed to Apple. This is a short little book that has multiple contents in here that's going to go through the process of a seed germinating, how it germinates, becomes a tree, and it's going to explain the process of apples actually most times when you buy apple trees at Lowe's, Home Depot, or your local gardening store, they've already been growing for 5 to 6 years at that point. To get an apple seed to an actual sprout to a tree that you purchase in the store takes about 5 to 6 years. This has a great lesson that you can engage with social emotional lessons, because you can talk about even an apple seed takes 5 or 6 years to bloom. Some students may take a little longer to bloom as well. So we're going to work the math in. We're going to talk about geography. We're going to talk about a little bit of history and literature. And we're also going to talk about a little social emotional connection. So just using apples. Now, for an older age group, when I did this lesson with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, we handmade our own graphing charts. You probably can't see the information down here, but we just penciled in all the different apple types. Now, for older students, we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different apples. With your younger group, you want to keep it to 2 apples, maybe 3 at the very most, because after they've eaten 1 or 2, they think they all taste the same. Your older students are going to be able to have a little bit more of a discerning palate. They're going to be able to look at these different ones, and they're going to be able to collect more data if they have more points to vote on. So I recommend for older age groups using more than 2 apples. Younger age groups, keep it fairly simple. Now, whenever you're doing a lesson, especially with young kids, with whether they're vegetables, whether it's fruit, one of the coolest things I've learned to do with kids is called dissection. And people usually think that this has something to do with frogs or bugs or different things, but we dissect fruit and vegetables in our classes here. And one of the easiest things to do is just cut an apple open, put it on a paper plate, give students their tools. We usually put a few toothpicks out with that, some small measuring magnifying glasses, and we let students just explore. What all did they see? I usually give them 5 minutes or so to just explore completely on their own. Then we talk about it and we get some more of those descriptive words. What did you see? What did you feel? Use those 5 senses. Was there a smell? Was there a taste? But letting students explore and investigate on a smaller level or a more intricate level than they would just by looking at it on a plate is a really good way for them to start learning those investigative skills that they're going to need carrying them throughout their educational history. One thing that I get asked about quite a bit is science and how they can implement agriculture education into their science lessons. One of my favorite ways to do that is through STEAM lessons. The acronym STEAM meaning science, technology, engineering, art, and math. A lot of people shy away from doing STEAM lessons with pre-K age students, but I love it because I see their brains working on a totally different level than older students, and the way that they look at the project, the challenge, and the way that they figure out solutions is really entertaining, and it teaches them about so many other skills. So a very simple and cheap STEAM lesson that you can do with apples doesn't even involve the apples that we cut up earlier. Those you will get to eat with your classroom, and when you're finished, always remind students about your composting bin. I'm going to go ahead and move my apples back to the bucket here, and I'm going to put my extras in the composting bin. Composting is something that we talk about here on the farm a lot, and I'll get to that a little more later, but always keep a compost bin handy in your classroom when you're working with fruits and vegetables so you can save those for many other purposes that they can serve later. When I went to the National Ag in the Classroom conference in Des Moines, Iowa in 2020, I had the opportunity to learn from some educators who had experienced a lot of these lessons in person with their students and honed their craft, brought them and taught them to other educators. So what I'm going to do here involves a paper towel roll, a few popsicle sticks, and a few palm balls. Now, with your pre-K level students, you're still working on those cognitive skills, you're working on those fine motor skills, you're wanting them to use their fingers to grab small things, place them, and just build those muscles, that muscle strength up. So this particular lesson is about building an apple tree. The students are allowed to tear the trunk of the tree any way that they want to. Their popsicle sticks are supposed to be their branches, and the palm balls are their apples. Now, if you're like me and you're always just trying to work with what you have, Instead of using all red palm balls, we talked about in our class about how actually we realized that not all apples are the same color. So feel free to use whatever resource you have that comes in a small ball form. That can be marshmallows, are extremely cheap and easy to use. I wouldn't use cotton balls for this. They're a little too big and they're gonna make the project too easy, and you want them to have a little bit of a challenge. So remember, when you are working with kids, that you need to be sure in a STEAM project to give them clear criteria, which means what are they trying to meet? What goal are they trying to reach with this? The criteria for this lesson was you were to create an apple tree with branches and see who could get the most apples onto their apple tree. I saw lots of different ways to do this. Some students began just well, they would also learn a little bit about stability, because if they bumped the table and their trees fell over, they realized that maybe that wasn't the best method. But lots of them would start just building them up like so and placing a few palm balls on their tree, better than I'm doing now. And the idea was to see how many could they balance on here. That took a little while. Other students asked, now you said we could tear this, right? And you're always gonna have at least one student that's gonna remember one specific detail that you gave early on, and they're gonna run with that. One student began tearing holes within the cardboard and sticking their branches further down into their tree trunk. Some also realized that if they tore it at the bottom and made feet for their trunk, that it would spread out and be more stable. So the idea is to just let students use their creative thinking skills, let them build outside of the box, and let them figure out what is the best way to get stability within a tree and to add branches and apples to that tree to make it stand upright. Once every student has finished building their tree in whatever shape, form, or fashion they have chosen, and they have gotten their apples on it, then you're gonna have students compare the different builds. So you can leave the trees at each student's station just so we don't have any trees falling over, but you get all your students together and you make a line walking around the room and checking out everybody's different designs. Then as a group, sit down, have a small discussion about which trees held the most apples. Why do you think that they held the most apples? What about their design or their build process made it to where the tree was able to sustain and hold up that many different apples? Maybe your students are a little bit older and this seems a little below their knowledge base. You can crank this lesson up quite a bit in many different areas. When I actually learned about this lesson at a teacher conference in Des Moines, Iowa, the lesson was actually presented for 4th and 5th grade students. And in that particular lesson, we had to do apple tree splicing. We learned about the history of that, how it works, and then we had to replicate that splicing effect with our tree trunk ingredients or pieces that we were using. So that one was much more complicated because you had to get a structural integrity that we're not really looking for here in the lower level age group STEAM activity. So there's lots of different ways that we can amp that up and make it a little more difficult. You can use different supplies added into this. You can use more fragile or breakable things that you were considering for your apples that you want them to balance on the trees. So lots of different ways to manipulate this lesson into being a lower level grades or a higher level grades. But bottom line, you can cover almost every subject in one particular day using nothing but a simple apple and show the integration process of agriculture in every subject that we offer in schools. All right, guys, let's talk about pumpkins. Pumpkins are beautiful, big orange gourds, and a lot of times nowadays they are pricey. So if you want to do this lesson, I highly recommend finding a local farmer in your area. When I implemented this lesson within my own classroom, I had been looking at farmers on Facebook for a little while, and I saw a local family farm that had grown pumpkins that year. Tons of really small little pumpkin pie type pumpkins. I reached out to them, let them know that we were doing a project with students. We were going to be doing a pumpkin thematic unit, and was there any chance that they would donate some of their pumpkins to us? And they did, which is likely the case in most times that you ask people. I have learned over the years in education, the worst people can say is no. And usually when you are dealing with kids, if you will take the time to just simply ask, especially a local farmer, they're happy to give anything that they can. So if you're doing this lesson within your own classroom and you want to split your kids up into multiple groups, if you can get the small pumpkins, I recommend those or prefer those for this lesson. Being the ever thrifty teacher, I'm using what I already had, which are my decorative pumpkins from our fall season here at the schoolhouse. So I'm going to be doing this lesson so you can see a little bit more of what's going on this larger pumpkin, so you can understand all the details that your students would be doing in smaller groups according to this lesson. This particular lesson is meant for middle age education. We're going to say anywhere from like 3rd to 6th or 7th grade, depending on how you enrich or remediate this lesson. First off, we're going to start with those descriptive words. Kind of like with our apples, it's always a great way to get the brain juices flowing when we get started, get the lesson kicked off, is just ask your students, describe the pumpkin. When you tell them they can hold it, they can touch it, they can smell it. I usually tell them don't lick it, don't taste it, but to use their senses and come up with these words. You are looking for 3rd to 6th or 7th grade vocabulary words. If you're not getting those, help them and encourage them to just get a few more descriptive words. Describing things such as, how does it feel? How does it look? Is it heavy? Is it light? What can we do with this pumpkin? What colors do we see? On the stem here, it's rough. We've got some lighter browns and some yellows. Towards the bottom, it's a darker orange. We can also then start teaching terminology for this particular fruit or vegetable. I'll ask you later which you think. Which would be our stem, which is important. Not all plants have a stem situation like pumpkins do. We have the eye of the pumpkin at the bottom, which is where the bloom first fell off of our pumpkin. We're going to learn about the ribs and the rind, which is the hard outer shell of our pumpkin. We can tell a little history and backstory about pumpkins and how they were saved during winter months and used. One of the reasons we use them and see them so much in fall seasons is because it's one of the few things that could be saved in a larder, which is a underground pantry storage that is cool year-round. Apples and pumpkins are one of the things that Pioneer stored the most of in their larders, so pumpkins are still a central part of our fall season and a fun thing that we can use within our classroom. Anytime you can come up with a thematic unit, I think that really engages the students a little more and gets their interest piqued. So now we've described it. We've come up with some literature words. We can take those words and write some haiku poetry with that, some descriptive poetry. We can use those words in so many different ways. We can do Mad Lib type pumpkin fill-ins for a literature unit. We can also do stories about our pumpkins, name them and give them personalities. But if we're going to move on to some math, we will start talking about some estimation. How many seeds do you think are in this pumpkin? Let each student group decide, or you can let each student vote. A lot of times we've given out little pieces of paper, let students go ahead and get a total, write their name on it, and at the end, after we cut the pumpkin open and we count the seeds, you can award a winner who had the best estimate. They can base their estimates on having cut open a pumpkin before, having read a book about a pumpkin. There's lots of different ways, but let them pull from some experience for that. If we are using this in some younger age groups, even in our 4th, 5th, 6th age range, this very short little book, it's a realistic fiction book called Pumpkin Pumpkin by Jean Titherington, is a really great book that explains the story of a little boy who grows a pumpkin from seed to full-grown pumpkin that he enters into a contest at the local fair. And through this book, you get to see every stage of the pumpkin's growth. And so there might be some hints in here that if you read this to students beforehand or you let them read it, each group pass out, have the same book and do the partner reading system. This is a great way to see that life process of your pumpkin from seed to the pumpkin that we cut off the vine. So students have already described it. They've guessed the number of seeds. Now it's time to cut into that pumpkin. So, after you saw me having to cut this gigantic pumpkin, you might understand why I recommend using the little small pumpkins in the classroom, because the tops come off a whole lot easier than this big guy. But students love to get their hands dirty, they love to get in there, and this is a perfect opportunity for that. Take your top off and start pulling the seeds out. Give students a paper plate, let them work as a team, and gut their pumpkin and separate all their seeds. This will take a little while. Let them get all of their seeds counted up and then do a comparison of all the estimations that we got in class. Who was the closest? Who was the furthest away? You can use this as a math lesson, so you can talk about the mean, the median, the range, the lowest amount of seeds guessed, the highest amount of seeds guessed, the average number of seeds guessed, how many seeds were actually in the pumpkin, and then we can talk a little bit about what do we do with the seeds in a pumpkin? Do we just throw them away? Do we just replant them? If you have time and you have a friendly cafeteria staff that can help you out, you can roast your pumpkin seeds as a snack for your class. But getting everybody to get in there, hands-on, pull everything out of this pumpkin is gonna be a fun hands-on learning experience, but a way that kind of connects everything that you've been talking about pumpkins to them. Because when you connect that physical experience, the sensory experience of sticking your hands in this pumpkin and smelling it, and if you eat the seeds, tasting it, looking at it, it's going to create those connections between the agriculture moment that's happening here, plus all of the subject matter that you're trying to cover within your math, science, language, and history lessons. Okay, so another way that we can bring in some more math aspects to your pumpkin lesson is doing some measurement and some more data collection. So usually we start out by giving students a solid ruler, a 1-foot ruler like this, and we ask them to collect the height and the circumference of their pumpkin, which if you give them this tool, you give them that instruction, and you let them start working, eventually you're gonna get someone who's going to ask, how do you get the circumference with a stiff ruler? This is when we can start talking about other types of measurement tools, not just this particular one, but lots of different things, whether it's a scale measurement, a yardstick, a meter stick. But what they're gonna need is a tool that is a flexible measurement system. So we're gonna use our wrap around measurement here, and we'll be able to get the circumference of our pumpkin. We can compare the circumference of our pumpkin to everyone else's pumpkin in the room. We can compare heights and length of stems. There's so many different aspects you can give students to investigate on their own and work on. So once we have finished with our math and measurement, let's move on to a STEAM lesson. With STEAM, you're always trying to give students a challenge. You want them to solve some type of problem. So in this instance, we're gonna bring in some more of that agriculture awareness, and we're gonna talk about how food is transported from farms to stores for people to buy. And one of these things is, how do we get the pumpkins to the store? How does a farmer load those? Is it done by a machine? Is it done by hand? How are pumpkins moved from one place to the other without breaking and ending up with their guts everywhere? So we have this conversation as a class. How do you think goods get moved around? How do we keep them from being damaged? How do we keep them safe? Their challenge then is going to be to create a simple machine that can pick up a pumpkin and load it into our truck. Now, this particular lesson that I have used multiple years in a row recommends using candy corn pumpkins. But as earlier mentioned, teachers are always trying to find ways to be thrifty. Over the last few years, candy has gotten a lot more expensive. So I have swapped out the candy corn pumpkins for using marshmallows. I also think this is better for the experiment, or the STEAM experiment overall, because you're gonna see more of the indentions left on a pumpkin versus those hard candy corn pumpkins. When we've used those in the past, we didn't see much differentiation between the pumpkins and the different machines. Without fail, every time we have done this lesson in our class, we have come up with students who say, I don't understand. If you are supposed to just pick it up, why can't you use just the clothespin? Because you give everybody the same set materials. They get some craft sticks, some clothespins, some plastic silverware, and some rubber bands. A simple machine can be built with just these few simple materials, but we have lots of people who will look at these things and immediately want to give up and say there is no way possible. So a great back lesson to start with before assigning this particular STEAM lesson is to talk about simple machines. You're going to give them the basics of what a simple machine is. I would give them some examples. Most likely this would be in your textbook, or you can simple Google search will produce a video that you could show. But your simple machines need to have some kind of a function. Whereas a lot of the students will pick up the clothespin and they want to know, why can't this work? This already has an open and close mechanism. It's a simple machine. Why won't this work? And you can show students using that marshmallow or a cotton ball. When you pick it up, you're talking about that agriculture awareness there. Is any farmer in the world gonna want his produce moved with something that pinches it so hard that it's gonna bruise the outside skin? No, but this is a problem faced by every farmer across the globe who moves product from their farm to the grocery stores. So they had to come up with a design and a simple solution, and students can do the same. Sometimes I have had instances where some classes were unable to come up with a completed design at the end that actually served the purpose and answered the challenge that was set forth for students. So be sure that you always end the lesson with giving some advice and maybe even showing an example of a completed design. This particular design of a simple machine was created by a student at one of the lessons that we ran this in. He used a clothespin, but he knew that he had to soften the clamp down of the simple machine when picking up the particular produce or fruit so that it didn't harm the fruit before going into the bowl or the vegetable. In this case, he added his two plastic silverware knives, and you can gently pick up and drop into your truck when you add the extenders on. So the main idea of this lesson is to get them using their brains, get them thinking a little bit outside the box, and taking simple materials and building a simple machine. So when you're working with agriculture education, you can implement it into so many different subjects. We've talked about literature, we have talked about dissecting, a little science, we have done a STEAM lesson. Then also, one of the last things I want you to talk about with students is what do you do with all of your leftovers from lessons using produce, whether that's our pumpkins or our apples. And in our case, we use it either as a composting ingredient for our compost pile at our school, or we use it to feed our pigs at the end of the day. Most schools are not going to have on-site pigs or maybe even a compost pile. So talk to a local farmer. Many of them would love to have your leftover pumpkins and apples. But for our last segment of our pumpkin lesson, another great science lesson that you can implement into that is talking about chemical reactions and what happens in that process. Doing that, we create a volcano pumpkin. When this is done with small groups with individual small pumpkins, we allowed each group to add the vinegar and baking soda to their pumpkin. They got to choose their own food coloring to go on the inside, and when it exploded, it came out with all of those colors. You can do this in the classroom. If you're using the small pumpkins, use some kind of plate or tray to go underneath them. It's not going to explode and hit the ceiling. It's just going to overflow like a bowl of water being overrun with a faucet. All right, guys, so for our last lesson that I'm going to present to you guys today, this is going to be for your little bit older age range, your middle age, middle school, 6th to 8th grade, maybe even 9th grade, depending on what concepts you want to cover with some of these. So we used this program last school year, and we had a STEAM class that met once a month for just 1 hour. There's not much you can accomplish, or you can't complete an entire STEAM lesson from beginning to end in just 1 hour and really cover the entire engineering design process. So we broke up the entire program into 4 different 1-hour class meetings. So you could choose to do this on maybe a Friday afternoon after test if you have some extra time, or implement it in a one-day class option that has a 4 or 5 hour back-to-back range that you have time to work in. For this lesson, we would begin by introducing transportation of agricultural goods. During the pandemic in 2020, there was quite a bit of supply chain breakdown, and this affected the agriculture industry tremendously. One of the reasons being, if there's no one able to drive the trucks, the food can't get to where it's going, or the produce or whatnot, and it won't make it to the consumer in the long run. So if there's no one driving the trucks, there's no one getting the food. We realized during the pandemic just what a huge part of our world this is today, and the movement of food all over our country. One of the ways we'll start out this lesson is just by bringing in some things from your kitchen at home. Go to your pantry, pull a few cans of soup, a bag of rice, a few different things, and bring them into your classroom. Break your students into small groups and let them each pick one of the food items. Have them locate on the back of the packaging where their food was packaged. This does not guarantee this is where the food was grown, but it will tell you where it was packaged and shipped from. Be sure when you're gathering these groceries together that you're getting places from all over the country, just to show the examples to students of just how far our food must travel to get to us for us to have. So that's why the title of this lesson is called Going the Distance. Students can use smartphones, they may use computers, whatever access you have within your classroom. Let them utilize Google Maps, entering in the location of whatever city you are in and whatever city or country, if it may be, that their particular food product came from, and calculate or find out how many miles it took for that food to get from where it was grown or produced and packaged and sent to where they currently live. This is eye-opening for a lot of students, not understanding just how far off their food comes. Specifically, bananas, pineapples, and other tropical fruits usually come from other countries, so usually good to pull a couple of those in for this lesson as well. But give students time to figure out just how far their food is traveling to get to them. Then talk about the ways that that food gets to them. Is it just on trucks? Is it on trains? Is it on boats? Is it on planes? Well, the answer is yes, all of these different things. So how does that world work? How do these things get around? So there's lots of different STEAM lessons for this age group that you can do with this agriculture transportation. What you're gonna wanna start with is a basket full of trash, or as I like to call them, treasures. I save just about any usable container or bottle that goes through my house. One, to keep it out of landfills, but two, because I'm a thrifty teacher and I like to reuse junk for projects. We use the idea of building our own transportation system. I gave students the possibility of building a boat that would float or a car that would move. We couldn't do trains for various reasons, but between all of the students, they voted and chose they wanted to make vehicles with wheels that rolled. Okay, great. Introduce laws of motion and potential and kinetic energy. These are great things you can teach through your STEAM lesson on building a device, some kind of vehicle that can not only move, but can it carry weight? Because you're not just moving the car itself, you have to move goods and products from one place to another. So in our class, we spent 1 hour each month for 4 months straight. And at the beginning of each lesson, I opened the lesson with a 15-minute introduction of some type of science concept that would help build on their project that they were learning about. We went from all three Newton's laws, and then we also talked about that potential and kinetic energy and had demonstrations of that for students, and then would give them at least 30 to 45 minutes of build time every time they came into class. They would keep all of their project in one box and continue building on it each time. Every time that they came, I provided a basket full of treasures, or trash, as I said. This could be styrofoam from home, bubble wrap, plastic lids from sour cream containers, bamboo skewers, any kind of random materials that you can find. Also, we collected a lot of our materials by sending out a letter to all of our parents and giving a list of plastics and other reusable items from home that we were collecting. And I started doing this a month or so before our lesson, and by the time we had our lesson, enough parents had donated enough materials that we had plenty of building materials for our project. The only part that cost would have been a little bit of our hot glue that we used and some Scotch tape. But other than that, all materials were sourced from trash. I take that back. Balloons. We had to figure out how we were going to get those cars moving, how transportation works. We discussed on a larger scale how fossil fuels are used for most vehicle travel within the United States, but for our particular cars, we had to figure out, well, what is our energy source? What is going to move our car from point A to point B? And we did that using balloons as our motion system added to our cars. We finished the lesson out with mainly getting our cars to move. We did not reach the point of adding the weights, but that's if you have longer for your lesson or more time that you can add over a semester, this is something that you can continue to build on. Once they have a car that is in motion, they know all of the forces acting on it, then adding those weights and moving those products from one place to another are going to start clicking, making sense, and understanding how much energy it takes to move products from a farm to a grocery store to your home. Overall, the idea that students are supposed to learn with this lesson is that agriculture is happening all around us. but especially when it comes to any of our products that we purchase in stores. Where did those products come from? How did they get there? What does it take to get those products from there? Is it just people? Is it energy? Is it time? It's all of these things. So building on this STEAM lesson of developing their own cars in small groups, they had to go through the design process of figuring out what size and shape would they want? How would they overcome some of these forces in order to move their vehicles from one place to another? And in the long run, the larger concept is helping them understand how their goods get from one place to another. All right, guys, well, thanks for joining me today to learn a little bit about how to implement agriculture education into your daily lesson plans. I wanted to leave you guys with a few resource opportunities for you. There are tons of lessons available online for free that you can access that have state standards, national standards, that are great resources for you. The first one is National Ag in the Classroom. It is a website, organization website. There is a curriculum matrix, on this website where you can type in and filter by grade, by subject, topic, and come up with just about anything that you can imagine in relation to agriculture education. Most of the lessons that I pulled today that I shared with you guys came from this National Ag in the Classroom curriculum matrix. I take that lesson a lot of times, morph it into what I need, kind of fill it in with my standards, but these are great opportunities, free resources out there for you guys. Another place that has some really great resources is your local community organizations. For us, we have accessed the Lamar County Soil and Water Conservation District. There are multiple of these organizations all over the state in different counties. Many of them have an education outreach specialist that will come to your classroom 100% free. They will do a standards-based lesson of your choice for your class. They will bring you all of the supplies, all of the materials, and they will teach the class 100% for you. One of the ladies of the organization told me we aim to please, we aim to give teachers a break. So if you have not utilized this resource in your area yet, I highly recommend reaching out to your local county soil and water conservation district. Another great resource in your community is your Farm Bureau Federation. The women's delegate in your area, their entire purpose is to spread agricultural education to as many people in the community as possible. They too will come to your classroom free of charge and do a standards-based lesson for your classroom. They also have an amazing traveling trailer, Ag in the Classroom trailer, that has a prosthetic cow inside that they will bring to your school and let your students simulate milking a cow, make butter, and learn all about the dairy industry. So there's so many great resources. Adopt a Stream out of Jackson is another great resource. They will send someone to your classroom to do free lessons for you. You just have to reach out, tell them what standards you're trying to cover, what you would like for them to talk about, and they are willing to come down and do that for you. Your local extension services, Mississippi State Extension Services, is available in every county in the state of Mississippi, and each one of these offices has a county agent. Ours, his name is Ross Overstreet, has been tremendously helpful with coming out and helping with our gardening class. They will help you look at your garden if you would like to start a school garden or even just a flower bed size garden outside the window in your classroom. They will help with this. Give them a call. All of these are great free resources. Lastly, all of the lessons that I talked about today, I'm going to list in PDF format on our website at schoolhousems.org. Visit that to see this video again if you need it, as well as accessing any of the lessons that we did today. If you have interest in them, they will all be posted on there for you. If you're ever in the Purvis area and you'd like to come out and check out the Country Schoolhouse and what we do here, we'd love to give you a tour and show you around, talk about a field trip possibility for your students in your classroom. But I thank you again for joining us, and I hope that you have success in implementing agriculture education in your classroom.